political clout in Western countries to involve us in wars that have got nothing to do with us. But it's not just them. There's a big militant Christian Zionist bloc. People with English surnames and English pedigrees and German surnames and German pedigrees, entirely Christian Gentile people just like us, who've got a crazy set of ideas about how basically if they can provoke a third world war around Israel and have Armageddon, then Jesus Christ will come back to the world and everything will be wonderful. These people are clinically insane, and they have enormous amounts of power and influence over the American body politic. And then, more than anything else, probably you've got the fact that what's called the military-industrial complex, the big companies like Halliburton, they want wars. Because it's not their sons get sent, it's their equipment gets sent. It's their equipment gets bought. When the Americans, with a little bit of help from the Brits, flattened large parts of the infrastructure of Iraq, you look at the companies, we've got the contracts to rebuild it. Follow the money. It's very often the case whenever there's a problem. You follow the money and you see what the issue is. And the fact is that you've got these different groups, these vested interest groups in the United States, partly ethnic, partly ideological, but mainly about money. They want us involved in the Afghan war, not least because it's a dry run. Their real aim is a war against Iran. And again, don't think this is some coded anti-peace or anti-Semitism. It is not. Because the biggest power of all that wants war against Iran isn't Israel, it's Saudi Arabia. Because there's two halves, the Sunni and the Shia halves of Islam, and they hate each other. They spent 1,500 years massacring each other at every possible opportunity, and the Saudis now want to use the Americans and the British to knock down the Iranians. So all these different groups are involving us in this war that's got nothing to do with us. And the public understand it. They don't get any of the delicacies of it. They don't understand the finer points, because surprisingly it doesn't appear on the BBC. You don't read about it in the Daily Mail, but the facts are facts. The people don't quite know the facts, although the internet, I think, puts a lot of facts into a lot of people's minds. A lot of people, far more than used to, now do understand what's going on. But the public instinctively understand that that isn't our war. That's why they're instinctively on our side when we're out there campaigning about it. And here's where, just to wind up, a very interesting side effect is we're campaigning against that war because it's wrong. We're campaigning against that war and for peace because we don't want our boys and girls dying in other people's squabbles. We would campaign on that issue even if the public supported the war, because we're a party of principle. We wouldn't run along and because the public were happy with the war say, oh yes, we're happy too, and wave our little plastic Union Jacks like the Tories do. Because we're a principled party, we're against that war because it's wrong, and we wouldn't care if it cost us support from the public to say that we're against it. It's the right thing to do. But as a matter of fact, the public are on our side. Like I say, instinctively they get the fact that that's a bad war. And the spin-off here is that traditionally, the British, nationalism, since the Second World War and the First World War, nationalism is perceived as being about war. Our nation's bigger than your nation. Our nation's more important than your nation. Our nations used to have that bit of land and you took it off us. So it was nations that went to war. And one of the reasons the public are still nervous about nationalism, and especially about the British National Party, the clue is in the name, is this subconscious thing left over and put into generations of school children, since the Second World War especially, that if you're a nationalist you're probably aggressive towards other nations, and that means that if you vote nationalist you might get a war. And I don't think it's a conscious thing, but it ticks away somewhere in the back of people's heads, somewhere along the lines, that if you're a nationalist you don't like other people and you want to go to war with them. Of course it's not true. As nationalists, we look at, say, the French or the Italians or the Swedes, who, if they're decent people, love their country, and we can understand that. We can feel for the way that they feel about their country, because we feel about our country. We look out on our countryside. We look through our historic towns, not the nightmare shambles they've made in many of our bigger cities, but you look in some of the lovely architecture or the lovely countryside of our country, and it fills you with pride, and more than pride. You can look at a sunset over the hills here, and you can almost be moved to tears by the fact that it's so beautiful, and it's so mystic, and it's so much ours. Everyone else feels that about their own country, and no real nationalist would ever go to war against a people of another country, especially in their own area, in their own country, because we know how they feel about it. It's internationalists who go stamping all over the world, who think, we know better than the Afghans, we'll go in and we'll sort it out for them. Those silly, ugly, primitive little peasants, we'll go and make their lives better. And those silly, ugly, primitive little peasants look on their country with as much love and reverence and desire to keep it theirs as we do. Perhaps the culture's a bit different, but in some way or other, they feel that it's theirs just as much as we do. Perhaps they're more militant about it. Someone attacks it and they immediately want to cut their heads off. We just want to complain and whine about it down the pub. You know, that's a cultural difference between how we do it. But the fundamental instinct is the same. And the fact is that nationalism isn't about war, it's about peace. Because if every single government merely said, tell you what, we're going to put right the mess in our own country before we go worrying about sorting someone else's mess out, and you look about Britain and at the crime and the broken families and the unemployment and the futile jobs and the collapse of industry, so that Swindon, which was once one of the industrial motors of the entire world with its locomotive works, is now basically a retail park for goods made in China. There's plenty of things there to put right. So what on earth business is of any British government to go worrying about how the people run their countries, when their own country, lovely though it is a bankrupt slum? So if every nation merely said, we're going to sort our own mess out first of all, and if we've got a bit of money left at the end of that, then when there's some terrible flood or natural disaster that affects some people who really can't help themselves, then if we've got no homeless on our own streets, and if pensioners aren't dying on hospital trolleys because we haven't got any nurses to man the beds, when our own country's put right, then we'll use a bit of our money as charity somewhere else. But until that's the case, it's pure hypocrisy to do so. But that's why nationalism isn't about war, it's about peace. Every people, every nation just looking after its own affairs. And us standing for peace in this campaign is a fantastic way of getting that across. And I think it's something that's very, very valuable. And the other thing, of course, is you've been out with the British National Party, and where people have heard of us, which is now most of them, they'll say, oh yes, you're the anti-immigrant party. Well, we're not. We're the anti-immigration party. There's a huge difference between being anti-immigrant and anti-immigration. And we don't for 1 minute blame the foreigners who come to this country, even the ones who come, the many of them, who come to sponge on soft-touch Britain at the expense of our taxpayers. We don't blame them, we blame the politicians who've let them come. The ones who put them in front of our own people. They're the ones that we've got to quarrel with. There's a quarrel one day we are going to sort out with those people. We'll make them pay for what they've done. That's making the politicians and the people running the mass media and the people designing the teacher training colleges who brainwash our kids. They're the ones that we want to deal with. And for the immigrants, even the ones who shouldn't be here, even the illegals, even the criminals, we simply want justice, which is to lock them up and throw them out, or if they come here legitimately, to say, look, you either stay here and adopt, that means adopting our ways, speaking our language, our culture, dressing like we do, treating your women and our women like we do. You either stay here and assimilate to us, and if you're not going to do that, the first train is there, the first boat is there, the door is there, get the hell out of our country. The public, whether we're anti-immigrants or anti-immigration, possibly doesn't matter that much, because when the young people of a town can't get jobs because it's awash with East Europeans working for a fraction of the wage, and as long as they leave within a year, allowed to reclaim all their tax, so there's no prospect of the Brits being able to compete with that. whether we're anti-immigrant or anti-immigration, to many people doesn't matter, because the British public have had it up to here with immigration and immigrants and cultural enrichment and us having to bend over backwards to do it their way. People are absolutely sick of it. So I'm not too fussed on that. We're second-class citizens, absolutely so. But it is still a fact that to be thought of just as the anti-immigration party, it is a problem. Because come a big election, people are thinking about other issues. In the last election, people were thinking about the Afghan war at the start of it, and we ran our election campaign, the activists will know, very firmly on an anti-war ticket. And you know that for the whole of the last 3-4 weeks of that campaign, if you watched the television, not a single British soldier died in Afghanistan. There wasn't a single piece of coverage of Wootton Bassett on a Tuesday or a Thursday and the repatriation of those poor kids. There wasn't a single bit of coverage in the last 3 weeks of that campaign. Normally you go to Wootton Bassett, a few of you have been, I know, and there's Sky trucks, there's BBC trucks, there's trucks from every single news agency in Britain there. There's photographers. During the election, they weren't there at all. They blanked it because they didn't want that war, because the whole British political elite stands for that war. The whole British political elite want that war and the Iran war that's going to come after it. Because of that, they didn't want that issue to come up in the election. So they simply blanked it. So we were talking about it, but the public, who sometimes aren't that bright, with 3 weeks, no coverage on the television of Wootton Bassett, somehow managed to think, oh, it's not really an issue anymore. So being a one-issue party is dangerous. It probably can't be seen as more than 3 issues, because the public can't keep more than 3 things in their head at any one time. That's not a particular smear on the British public, that's just a simple fact. But to be just seen as the anti-immigration party isn't a healthy position to be in. It allows, say, the Tories come an election and suddenly say, if we get in, we'll stop immigration. Which of course is a lie, because they're a party of mass immigration every bit as much as the Labour Party is a party of mass immigration. But the public think, yeah, well, perhaps we'll give them one more chance. If you're known for several popular issues, then it makes it far harder for other parties to come in and muscle in on your turf. And that's why this campaign's so important. And it's why I was so pleased to see so many hands go up when I asked how many of you have been out. Because it's not just about the campaign itself, it's also about repositioning our party so that the public think, yep, they've got views, they've got policies on a range of subjects that I can agree with them on. And when you've got such an unpopular war, every single one of you who's been out, every person who goes out, I hope everybody, over the next few weeks, when we do the last 2 weeks of the campaign, it's not just the people who sign, it's the hundreds who walk past, seeing decent, respectable, normal, wide range of men and women, young and old, veterans with the war medals and so on, manning these stalls, asking people to sign up to this issue. It's really important to make the British National Party be known not just as the anti-immigration party, but also as the peace party. That's what we're after here. That's the prize there, to be seen not as nationalists, perhaps therefore equals war, but nationalists therefore equals minding Britain's business, keeping ourselves out of other people's wars, and making sure that our soldiers don't go fighting elsewhere, halfway around the world, in a battle that's got nothing at all to do with us. And that's a prize that's within our grasp, because no one else is interested in this subject. The far left go out about it, but they don't connect with the British public, and they're not out on the streets of the small towns of Wiltshire, as I know that people here have been, and they're not out in the small towns in Somerset and so on. So it's wide open for us, and it's really important that we do that. So thank you all very much for being involved. Just to finish off, like I said at the beginning, we're not a pacifist party. We support the idea of a British army and a British military. Just one thing about the cuts that the Tories and the Lib Dems are now putting through. You've seen how they're saying, oh, it's only going to be an 8% cut in the armed forces. But actually whereas Trident, the nuclear missile capability, used to be funded separately, now it's going to be funded out of the armed forces budget. It actually means cuts of about 15 to 20%. And one of the cuts they're pushing through, they're still building 2 huge aircraft carriers. There's going to be no planes to put on. Seriously. Aircraft carriers with no planes. What do you think's going on there? I'll tell you what's going on there. You have to have planes if you have an aircraft carrier. So otherwise it's one huge sitting duck just waiting to be sunk. But we're not going to have the planes. Who has the planes? The French. The French don't have the aircraft carriers. They're going to make these buggers. They're not going to be made in our waters. They're not going to be made in our yards. They're not going to be made up in Barrow and Furness, out on the Clyde,